Thanks for joining us today. My name is Zach Dewar. I'm an assistant professor here. I know a lot of you. Thanks for coming. I'm so happy to see you. I'm very happy to introduce Jonah Brucker-Cohen, who is coming here to give a talk for us today. So Jonah is an artist, and he's an associate professor in the Department of Journalism and Media Studies at Lehman College, CUNY in the Bronx. He's currently a visiting artist at Cornell Tech. His work focuses on deconstructing networks with works that challenge and subvert accepted perceptions of network interaction. His artwork has been exhibited at venues such as SF MoMA, Canadian Museum of Contemporary Art, the MoMA, the ICA London, the Whitney Museum of American Art, Palais du Tokyo, Palais du Tokyo? Did I say that right? Tate Moderne, Ars Electronica, Transmedial. If you guys don't know, these are like all the big ones. Yeah, like that's what I just said is extremely impressive, by the way. He's written for Wired, Make, Gizmodo, Neural, and more. His Scrapyard Challenge workshops have been held in over 15 countries in Europe, South America, North America, Asia, Australia since 2003. No Antarctica. Not yet. Okay.
Not quite.
So today he's going to discuss his projects in the theme of critical networked experience that include works that challenge and subvert accepted notions of network interaction and socialization. So please help me welcome Jonah Brucker-Cohen.
Cool. Thanks. Awesome. Hey guys, thanks for coming. This is not my energy level. I'm okay actually right now. It's cool to be here on campus. I haven't been to Virginia Tech, but I grew up in Washington, D.C., not too far away. So it was cool to come down and see what you guys are up to. So as Zach mentioned, I'm currently at the City University of New York. That's what CUNY stands for. They have 6 campuses all around New York City. I'm in the Bronx up at Lehman, which that campus used to be the original site of the UN for people who are interested in that type of history. But my work that I'll talk about today is about kind of looking at networks in different ways. And so what I call it, the title topic is critical networked experience. So my PhD was called Deconstructing Networks, and it was all about how we can think about ways to challenge how we use the internet, how we use mobile phones, how we use connected and wired and wireless networks, and also social media. So the projects I talk about today will look at all of these concepts and ideas, and I'll kind of go through the gamut. So to start off, I want to show about context. So this is a street in China where on the left, if you have a cell phone, you're allowed to use that walkway. On the right, you're not allowed to, right? So they basically separate the street based on technology that you have. So we're seeing public spaces being disrupted by the way that people use technology in general. And you might have seen it in some places, like put down your cell phones now. It's also happening in, this works. It's also happening on wireless networks. So this is my clicker will work. Yeah. So this is a guy who didn't want people using their internet, so he got his own internet because people were upset about him using it. I'll try to get closer so I get it. And this is somebody who is like, I really don't like my neighbors, so I got to start creating a network that stops my neighbors from bothering me. And he wrote, "My neighbors suck" on my network. So that's an example there. And then we have things like Twitter and Instagram, the differences there. So this is an ad in the New York City subway, me on Instagram cooking and plating beautiful food. And then on Twitter, sitting in bed naked, eating an 8-bit glass of chicken, showing you the differences between these networks, what they mean, how people perceive themselves on social media, what they want to be, what they don't want to be, and how we kind of can play around with that idea. So my projects today will be looking at all these different areas. The first one is dynamic data networks. So when you add a static identifier with real-time data, looking at kind of changing the way that we examine data coming in. We see a lot of data, weather data, news, traffic, environmental data. When we kind of play with that data and challenge it, and we create new ways of looking at it, I'll kind of show examples of projects that do that. Also, mobile media, right? So everyone has a phone now, but one thing that we do on the phone very well is talk individually with people. And typically the phones tend to take us away from groups. When we get a call, we have to like run to the other room and like, let's take our call, but we can't work together in the group. So I'll show a project of mine that actually at the end, everyone who has a phone here, you guys can all participate in it. And it's this kind of a social phone system. Also looking at location hacking. So when we add things like social data to location services. We have a lot of location services on our phone, but they don't really tell us that much about like the neighborhoods we're visiting, except for things we want to see, like sites or restaurants or movies or things like that. But what about social data? What about like the environmental data? What about how many crimes are happening in the neighborhood and things like that? And then finally, I'll talk a bit about two other projects that look at, one is about human frailty. So I designed a series of projects that look at the errors that we do with technology and how we can add those errors back into the technology to kind of inform us about interface design. And then also I'm working on a new series that look at environmental technology and how we can kind of invert the relationships associated with the environment and how we can kind of clean the air, pollute the air, and create these systems that do that. So I'll start off here. So back in time, right, 1832, this is a picture of the telegraph that was invented by Samuel Morse. And where I live in New York, in Brooklyn, Samuel Morse is actually buried at a cemetery like 2 blocks away from where I live. And I'm wondering on his gravesite if there's just Morse code instead of his name. Probably there is. But this shows you that technology used to be in a physical location. It wasn't mobile. You actually had to go to the internet or go to the network and actually use it that way. And so it's a bit different than what we have now. And then I used to teach at NYU, where Neil Postman was a professor. And then he wrote this book called The Technopoly, The Surrender of Culture to Technology. And he says that the telegraph removes space as an inevitable constraint on the movement of information. And for the first time, transportation and communication were disengaged from each other. So that, to me, shows a lot. That's sort of what's happening now with mobile technology, is where you actually don't have to bring your message physically to someone anymore, right? It just shows up instantaneously. And sometimes it shows up when you least expect it or at least want it. And so that means that a lot of the getting there part is gone. So for instance, everyone here had to come from someplace to get here, right? And there's a whole journey that you had to do. You had to walk from your other building on campus or from your house to come over here. And that whole journey is something that you have in your head. But internet, we get things, email, we get instantaneously. There's no journey. So my work really looks at how we can reintroduce the journey back into online communication systems, or make this kind of a little bit less clean than it should be, a little bit crazier and kind of noisier and static. So some earlier projects. This is an early project of mine from when I was first starting out. It's called Loading, Please Wait. It just loads an image forever, right? 2K just kind of keeps going and kind of looks at impatience. So we want things to be very fast, but when the things happen like this, we're like, why isn't it loading? What's going on? So it examines how we can use impatience with the internet and kind of turn that into a static kind of, or like a physical thing. It focuses on how advances of technology provoke human reactions, and people get mad at their computers. They want to like throw them out the window, right? So this is also about feedback loops, right? Feedback loops often dictate the way that we do things. An example of a feedback loop is when you're driving on the street, you see a sign that says your speed and the actual speed, and it forces you to slow down. So that's another example of how these feedback loops are online or kind of changing our behavior. So I also built a project that looks at networks from a parasitic kind of perspective. So I was interested in, I was interested in looking at old technology and how that informs us about new technologies. This is called Forward Compatible. It's an earlier project from about early 2000s, where I built this device that connects to a wireless router. And every time packets go through the router, it makes the sound of an old modem connecting, like a really ugly sound, which you guys might not be familiar with because it was for us old people to remember. But basically, when you connect, you just have to go through a phone line. It made the sound, and so it creates the modem sound dialing when it goes up, and it forms network connectivity in public spaces. It disrupts this idea that everything is clean, everything is easy, is seamless. We don't have to think about it. This takes streamlining and like puts in your face. So here's a video of this real fast. You can hear the sound if it works. Hear that? That's that. Yeah. I'm not sure if we can turn it up maybe a little bit, but maybe I just can't hear it because I'm over here. So this idea of turning streamlined technology into things that that's actually a low volume, so it's probably okay. We have other stuff that's louder. Into things that are disruptive is key to some of my work. Yeah. So I'll let that go. Sit here. I was like, Just keeps going. So it's a reaction to how, in the future and even currently, we're trying to turn everything invisible. Basically, this move to ubiquitous computing where technology kind of turns into the background and disappears, but how we actually can make it more present is important. So I'll move on from that. So looking at downloads, I was really interested in noticing that, the faster your speed is, typically depends on how much money you can spend on it, right? So it's about bandwidth that is monetary in value, and it also is about kind of getting from point A to point B, but how do we actually democratize that a bit? So I built this project a while ago. It's called Crank the Web, and this is like a physical hand crank that you have to download your website by hand to get it. So you put in google.com, you actually have to go crank to get Google to download. So it materializes bandwidth, makes it physical. It emphasizes physical interaction, right, in a world where everything we do now is automated. You almost don't have to lift a finger anymore, right? So how do we actually bring that physicality back to things like the web? And it also takes the technology that's like 2,000 years old, which is the crank, and brings it into today's forefront. I was showing you a little demo. I was just testing the sound. I don't have good video of this project at all, but this is like in my office at the time, very loudly cranking an email out, right? So you don't want to do that every morning. And you definitely don't want to have a crank on your phone to do this. But the idea is just to kind of make it more physical, make it more pronounced, and kind of introduce it in a different way. So that was part of a whole series of projects called Physical Internet Connected Devices. And this is another one of them. So looking at network presence, there are a lot of visitors, there are a lot of physical structures that actually have website components. So Virginia Tech, for instance, on its website right now, there could be 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 people visiting the website, and we're here on campus, but there's no connection between us and those people on the web, right? So this is a project that I made called Alerting Infrastructure. That's a jackhammer that starts destroying the building every time someone visits the website of that building. So it physically takes down the building. So it examines how a website relates to the structure it represents, right? So it actually can have those spaces. It shows how people in those two spaces could actually interact in some way back and forth. Please don't take our building now. And it adds consequences to visiting an online space. So like, 1 million people a second click the Google search bar, but it doesn't fall off like a doorknob would if you have 1 million people try to open the door at the same time, right? So how can we add these like physicalities back to network settings? This is a video. So this is an older project. Wow, it's almost like 20 years old at this point, but it still kind of lives on in a way because it has all these interesting connections to what we're doing. So we go to, so you'll see. So one of the examples that people wanted to do with this project was take down the museum. But let's see. That's what it sounds like. And then on the website, you get a physical reminder of what you did. So you damaged that much percentage, and it keeps ticking up every time you. So people are like, refresh. And we have this issue now where people don't need physical spaces anymore. We saw it during the pandemic, right? You have these online spaces. So how do you breathe life back to these spaces? And then I was joking. I was like, how could I take this, even more the next level? So then this is my next level of this project, which I haven't done. And then I was like, hey, maybe even further. This might be my even further level, which I haven't done yet, but maybe somebody knows a building that I could try out. This is my extreme level of this, which I haven't done, but it was kind of crazy. So moving on from there, looking just in general at critical interfaces, this is a great keyboard project. I'm not sure if who made this, but it's great. But according to Microsoft, the only keys you need for Windows is Control-Alt-Delete. So why not make the entire keyboard just Control-Alt-Delete, which is a great idea. But we're seeing more and more people trying to kind of challenge interfaces, and they're doing it with social media too. And in 1991, Donald Norman, you guys might have read before, wrote this book called The Invisible Computer about interface design. And he says, once an infrastructure gets established, it's difficult to change. They're deeply embedded into the culture of society, so ingrained in the ways they have learned to live, work, and play that change can take place very slowly, sometimes even decades, right? And we see that with the user interfaces with phones, with computer operating systems, with basically everything. And so I was interested in taking a system that people understand, manipulating it, and then bringing it back into the public to see if people could, how their behaviors would change. And so in 2003, I was asked by the Whitney Museum in New York to commission an artwork for their website. They had a web portal for artists. And so I did a project called Bump List that sort of disrupts social networks before social networks really existed, right? This was 2003, Facebook didn't exist, Twitter didn't exist. This was an email community for the determined. So it takes an email list that you guys might have all joined before, like, you know, any email list that sends out like a Google group list. But the issue with Bump List is that it only supports 6 people. So when you join Bump List, you bump off the first person, right? And then when they join back, they bump off the next person, and it becomes kind of like musical chairs meets email with this revolving subscription policy. So at the time of this screenshot, there were 82,000 total subscriptions. It was written about in the New York Times, and it kind of went crazy to the point where bumping rates were almost every few seconds, where people couldn't even join long enough to write an email or they'd be bumped. And I was originally wrote my own email server to host this on its own PC, and you know, back in the day, and then it was offline for a long time because that computer had to get offline, and then I was like asked a couple of years ago to reinstall it for a show, and it's actually installed right now in Shenzhen in China for a big biennial show that they're doing now. And I was like, how do I actually rebuild it? So I actually rebuilt this project. You can try it out if you go to bumplist.net. And I rebuilt it on top of all free software because at the time that didn't exist, but now we have Gmail. So the whole thing runs on Gmail now, which is pretty amazing. So it placed rules on accepted forms of online discourse. We take discourse for granted, but this challenges how we use discourse, how we kind of manipulate it. Imagine if Facebook had a rule where only the first 5 people could like something, and after that, no more. Or if you didn't get enough likes on a post, you weren't allowed to post. Right, so those are the kind of rules that I'm playing with here. It's like looking at when you add a rule, does it change the system? How the constraints and structures of a system can influence the community. And we have people that were really determined to stay on Bump List, that they would try to write bots that would auto subscribe them, and and they would like police the list and tell people what to post. There was no archive, so you couldn't see what you missed. It was really kind of crazy. So you can check it out at bumplist.net, and it forces competition and exclusivity to those communications and subscribe link. Yeah. I won't go to the website here, but if you check it out on your phone or on your computer, you can see it. So moving on from there, I'll talk about a kind of series of work that I've been creating that looks at political and social displays. That was the picture in the front. And back in 2003, actually even before that, back in 2001, after 9/11 in New York, there was a artist group called Radical Software Group that was interested in looking at surveillance culture and how the governments have the power now to kind of snoop on commercial IPs and commercial internet access providers. And the FBI was working on a project called Carnivore that would basically like snoop on these carriers like AOL at the time, I think, and Earthlink and big kind of providers, and look at terrorist activity and try to like, you know, police it before it would even get out. So this artist group called Radical Software Group made their own Carnivore, and they're like, now everyone can snoop, so it's not a government controlled thing, it's an artist controlled thing. And they asked artists to take the data and do something interesting. So I made this project called Police State that uses the snooped data to remote control police cars that drive around in patterns based on what type of data it found. And so mine was the first kind of physical reappropriation of this data. And most of the other ones that were made were all software-based bots, which are pretty interesting. So it looks at how data can be reappropriated. How can you take digital data, turn it into physical things, have the physical things move around or change based on the data input, and also how you can strengthen that relationship between the things you see on the screen and the things that are in physical spaces. And here's a video. It's also almost like 20 years ago. I can't believe it, this project, but of this project. So this was from the second installation of it in the Netherlands. There was a conference that doesn't exist anymore, I think, called Hyperdata. So Carnivore is the name of the software. So it's a client, meaning it connects to Carnivore, grabs the data, and then commands the cars. So this is a top view of all the cars. And so the way that this was is basically like a hacked system where all the cars are the same type of toy. And I basically took one controller, hacked that controller, and they all listen to the controller. So they all move together as one sequence. So you can see like they're all getting the same commands, but they're in different places. And there's definitely a point in this video where the cops take like a donut break. I think it's here. Yeah. Donut break. But it's really interesting too. They kind of have this synchronized effect. I was looking online and I found keywords that were mapped to police codes. And so I found a list for California and I mapped all those codes to the keywords. And then I built some software that shows all the data coming through on the right side, all the keywords and the police codes underneath that, and then just a visualization of what the cars might look like moving around so I could kind of visualize it on the screen. Most of the time, they're all on top of each other. And then the data looks very garbled, but you'd often get real HTML text that you could find and then map it to a keyword. And the idea is that the police become puppets of their own surveillance, right? The surveillance is being controlling them, not the other way around. Yeah. This is at the opening there. And so I think this project has been shown in about 6 different countries. The most recent was in Canada. No. So anyway, that's kind of the sped up version of that. So I'll move on from that to the next political display, looking at this. So looking at location services, I'm really interested in how our phones, every app you download now asks you for your location information. You're like, why do I have to give like a stupid game where I am? Because basically they're mining the data and using it to sell off to advertisers. So I was interested in taking the data and using it for something else that was more kind of ridiculous, but also kind of social in a social type of way. So this project is called Kill a Route, and it takes location data, and you put in a route in your GPS app to where you want to go, and it takes you through the most dangerous part of the city to get you to your location based on crime data coming in from the internet. So this is it's an iOS app, converges this live crime data with GPS mapping. We don't really see that social aspect to GPS. It just takes us to our destination, but this actually routes us through those areas we don't want to see. And it creates a data layer on top of navigation architecture. So it imagines a future where we have abundant data integration into everything we do. That's definitely going to happen. It's already happening, all over the place with things. And here's a video. This sound might be loud. We'll see. This is the sound level. Yeah, kind of loud. Yeah. Yeah, thanks. That one's really loud for some reason. That's okay. That's good. Cops footage taken for that, but so that project is open source. It was actually created at a hackathon at NYU that I attended with a bunch of other people. Also just kind of a silly project, but also, interesting that we don't see a lot more of that data integration happening. So in 2020, during all the kind of Black Lives Matter protests and a lot of protests happening anywhere all over the country, I worked on a new project called To Protect and Server, and this was with an artist named Mark Ramos, who is actually supposed to be here today, but he got sick, so he couldn't make it. But he's an artist that I met through New Ink. New Ink is kind of like an incubator for artists in New York, part of the New Museum that I've been a mentor at the last 3 years. The New Museum is like a big contemporary art museum in New York. And they have this really interesting program there. So we collaborate on this project to protect and server, and it uses Google's reCAPTCHA, but instead of looking at streetlights and stuff, you actually have to identify images of police brutality and verify those images according to the server. And then if you find the right images, it takes you to a video game called Police Enforcer that teaches you and trains you how to become a police officer, or how to think like a police officer. So this reimagines reCAPTCHA software to train the public on acceptable behavior of the police. One thing I actually learned when I was giving this talk, somebody was saying that, you know how like Google reCAPTCHA always has pictures of crosswalks, right, and lights? That is Google training its AI for self-driving cars, right? So that we're now training its cars to know what crosswalks are and stuff, so that their cars can drive themselves. Kind of interesting. So this connects actual images with anime video game depictions of police to show biases in popular culture. There are a lot of biases, obviously, related to what the police are doing, who they're arresting, why they're arresting them, as we saw with the Tyree Nichols thing, and it's crazy. So basically, it critically explores this relationship between police, violence, virtual training, officers, and then the game itself is supposed to teach you what to do as a police officer, and it's kind of very inaccurate. So here's a video of this project. Yeah, the game is called Police Enforcement VR Kings 27. It's actually a free open source game. There's some clips from here. So it's when you're an officer, you're supposed to show your credentials, but it uses AI and machine learning, which is a lot of these things do to predict what you're gonna press on. Cool. So also looking at protests in general and also violence, and it's sort of crazy related to gun violence. I made this project in 2019 that looks at video games and gun violence, because a lot of politicians tend to blame gun violence on gamers, right? They play video games, they want to like shoot the public. So this project is called Weapon of Protest, and it's a Nintendo hardware kind of Nintendo light gun that's repurposed. So when you click the gun, it actually emails a protest letter to the NRA. It's telling them to stop trying to promote guns and violence. So this is kind of the idea is that you use the actual weapon itself to protest the weapon, and it critically kind of examines this relationship between video games and mass shootings. And actually, when Trump was president, he reiterated this statement after there was another violent episode. And this is a video that we made in this. It's also kind of loud, but that's the Trump thing. Calling them gruesome and grisly is true, but yeah. And it's that's the incidents in 2019. I think VTech is on there actually. Yeah, it was written in 1791, right? Which is kind of crazy. So I actually found the email address of the head of the NRA online, and somehow, luckily, didn't hook it up to him, but this is a clip from CNBC. Yeah. So anyway, that's from a clip that I got online from about gaming. So moving on from there, those are kind of some political displays. Now I want to talk a bit about what the net and the internet is doing to our minds as an instrument of not sort of destruction, but just kind of playing around with kind of how we use it. So one of the problems we're having with the cloud and devices is that our memories are disappearing. I don't know if you guys remember this. So I ask my students every semester, I'm like, what if I deleted your address book? How many of those numbers would you remember? Right? Anyone? One, maybe two. So this is a funny quote that I found. It says, I finally realized that people are prisoners to their phones. That's why they call them cell phones, right? Maybe that's true, maybe that's not. But yeah, I think it definitely is the case. So in 2007, David Brooks, who's an amazing author, wrote this article for the New York Times called The Outsourced Brain. And he has a quote, there's a quote from this article where he says that I thought that the magic of the information age was that it allowed us to know more. But then I realized that the magic of the information age was that it allows us to know less. And he's talking about storage, right? The cloud, and how we don't have to remember anymore. And so it provides us with this external cognitive servants, silicon memory systems, collaborative filters, consume preference algorithms, and network knowledge. So we can burden all these servants and liberate ourselves, meaning we don't have to carry this data with us anymore. Cloud does it for us, the internet does it for us. How many times if someone asks you a question, you're like, I'll just look that up, right? You don't have to remember it. So, oh, somebody's phone. So here's a conversation that maybe some of you guys have had. It's a text message. Hey, babe, who is this? Sorry, I lost all my contacts, right? Your boyfriend. Okay. Jake. Kev. Shit. So we're seeing these problems happen a lot, and that's because we don't remember this stuff anymore. It's something that's happening to our brains. And so in 2018, I developed an iPhone app that never made it to the App Store because Apple doesn't like my stuff probably. But it's called Contact Rot, and it's an app that slowly decays your contacts if you don't contact them enough. So it starts deleting names, it starts deleting numbers, it starts deleting some of the numbers from your numbers, so not all of them. So you have to remember which numbers are missing. It also like keeps track of like how many times you called the person. So it tells you within the last few weeks, last few months. And then it gives you kind of an idea. So it's this, yeah, it's basically this iPhone app that looks at that. And so it reminds us how our devices are replacing our memory, right, with cloud storage. And all of these things start fading away if they're not contacted, and they only remain relevant. If they remain relevant in your life, you're going to have that number. But if they don't call them enough, then they might forget about them. It's sort of the problem where people have 1,000 Facebook friends and they might contact like 2 of them every week, but the rest of them, they just have them on their thing. Like imagine if those names start disappearing. So here's a quick video of this project. All my volume levels are up and down. That's it. Yeah. So this is a time-sensitive address. Tells you how many months ago you contacted the person or hours. So it forces you to go back and actually talk to these people and find out what their numbers are. But I wasn't able to get it into the App Store. Hopefully, at some point I will. See. So moving on from there, also related to cell phones, in 2016, I work in the Bronx in New York City, and there was a hospital in the Bronx called Montefiore, and they contacted me about doing a project for their waiting spaces, which are often very nerve-wracking spaces. You guys might have been in hospital waiting rooms. They're not fun spaces. So I was interested in pitching something that would help people to escape those spaces, get away from them, try to kind of edge conversations into those spaces. And so I built this project called Healing Destinations. That was in 2016. And it basically is it's a commission for the hospital. It's a model of the earth that's written in a WebGL, which is a web-based 3D software that can run in a browser. And it allows for people to use their phones to navigate the earth collectively. So it gives people in these spaces a way of like escaping the spaces into places that they might actually feel more comfortable with than a hospital waiting space. And it allows them to kind of move around the world creatively. So the whole system, which is pretty, I don't know of other projects that do this, but instead of just picking my own database, I actually use Wikipedia as the database for this project. And it picks, so if you send it a location, it could find like 10 different things in that location because the database is so open. So here's a video of this project back from 2016. So these are like typical waiting spaces that are not very exciting. And people basically just look at daytime TV and it's not that interesting for them. So I wanted to figure out how we could actually humanize them, make them a bit more sociable, also make them feel more at home. So you can send it a location, Brooklyn, Great Wall of China in this case. And that globe spins to the location that you chose, shows an image, shows some text, and then keeps a pin on the globe of where everyone has gone to. So you get this collective view of people in the space that have visited these locations. You can also send in an emotion. So you can send it like beauty, love, happy. And then if you send it happy, it goes to Disney World, of course, because it's the happiest place on earth. But but you can send it to, this one's sushi. It goes to the middle of the ocean. But basically the whole idea is there is like to change that location, change that space, make it something more engaging than what it used to be, and try to kind of humanize it a bit, because I think those are kind of spaces that need to be humanized. And it also doesn't kind of strays away from very touristy locations too. So it'll find interesting stuff that you might not have picked out. That was the hospital that commissioned me at the end. Cool. All right, cool. So I'll move on from there. So also in cell phone interaction, and actually at the end of this, stick around to the end of the talk because you guys will all be able to participate. So I built a project called Lively back in 2016 that was based on an earlier performance project that I did called Simple Text that basically allows the public to send text messages into a system, and then it visualizes them all in 3D and kind of moves around the space. And so it was a toolkit, enables kind of public reaction in public spaces very anonymously. So it doesn't actually show your phone number. It doesn't keep track of phone numbers. It doesn't keep track of names. It just allows you to kind of send in a message and have the messages all show up together on the screen. And it allows kind of these experiences to grow as more people enter the space. So this was a picture on the right of when I showed it in 2016 at SIGGRAPH, which is a big computer graphics conference that I was the art gallery chair for that year. And so it engages the audience through SMS. And the other thing is a lot of projects that have to do with phones now want you to download their app, right? It's an app-based system. And I was trying to get away from that. I wanted people to use apps they already had, like the messaging app, in order to connect. and it has bad word filters. Don't try to break that one. And the demo at the end of the talk, here's a video of this project. So you can see it's a 3D space, projection space where words show up. This was shown at a theater, and basically it asks you to like prompts for a question and people text in their answers. But the answers could be all over the map and they don't necessarily have to be related to the prompt, but they could be anything. And then another aspect is it looked up images based on what people sent in. But I found that can also be problematic. It's really hard to filter images from bad content that you don't want. There's ways for people to get around it. Something happened. Sure happened. Maybe a video. Something died. Let's see. I'll keep going. It's possible. Yeah, I'll just skip through that. So anyway, I'll show you the demo at the end so you have an idea. All right, so we'll move on. So the last two projects, or the last couple projects look at, this is a brand new one that I just made that looks at climate change inversion. I'm actually working on a series that does this, but basically how there are a lot of projects there that look at climate change, but I wanted to kind of twist it around and challenge it and make something that was almost kind of nonsensical. So this is a CO2 emitter, right? CO2 contributes to greenhouse gas that is powered by a solar panel. So, I went forward the other way. Well, skip that. Yeah. I'll show you the lively thing in a minute. So the last couple projects, and then we'll get into human error. So it's called loss depletion, and it's basically a the wrong way. Okay. Yeah, it examines the repercussions of trying to stem rapid climate change by using something like natural power or natural-based power, clean energy to create non-clean energy. It uses green energy as a critical instigator that creates pollution. Another example of a project here would be like a combustion-powered, gas-powered air purifier, right? Similar kind of thing, the opposite of what it's supposed to do, does the opposite. So this allows people to, that's what's wrong. So here's a video of this project. Looking at kind of how you could actually create artwork for the environment that is critical, but also can kind of play around with this idea of just bringing people's attention to the fact that we waste so much and we pollute so much and it's not healthy for our habitat. There should be sound, but I don't know if we're getting the sound. That's okay. Yeah, so we have so much other trash that's polluting in general, and it's about, and methane also contributes, not only CO2, but any type of greenhouse gas will contribute to atmospheric pollution. And then we have a lot of potential to use solar energy, but only about 10.2% is using it, which is not very much. So I was thinking about ways that we could actually just bring to the attention that we need to use it more, but also in a way that provokes it a bit. Looking at global energy sources. Yeah. So this will probably be one of a series of different projects that I'm working on that look at this eventually. Yeah, I don't know what happened to the song. Maybe I muted it. No, I didn't do it. Okay, and then the last couple of projects I'll look at is about human-centered interfaces and how we use devices, but we often do it very wrong. So over the last year, I built a series of projects that I think Zach talked about in one of his classes called Human Error. And actually at the end of the talk, I have stickers that I can give you guys if you guys want stickers for this, laptop stickers for this. So I brought some you can give. So some of the projects in the series basically examine, there are about like 16 projects in the series, and this is what they do. There's basically, we're confronted with these interfaces that are supposed to be easy, right? But a lot of them, they're very confusing. We can't really understand them. So there's about 18 projects in the series that look at how all the errors that we do could be integrated back into the technology itself to provoke our understanding of how we use them. And so maybe if we design those elements into those interfaces, we'll be closer to creating machines that are more like us. That pass the Turing test means that machines are almost as dumb or make the same mistakes as humans do. Possibly. So the first one I made is called Letter Dial. It's an iPhone app that removes the numbers and forces you to dial with letters only, right? You guys know those like letter combination things? Well, you just think about flipping that so that now all you have is the letters, not the numbers. You have to remember which letter is associated with which number. So that's really difficult for most people. So this adds that error back into the device. And it integrates our reliance on software that compensates these abilities. So here's a little video of this. There should be sound. I don't know why there's sound. Oh, okay. Maybe we can put it back up for this. Yeah. Yeah. Can you put it back? Or, sorry. Yeah, it was really loud for that other one. There's some sound here. Sound is good. So yeah, it's gonna work. Yeah. So you have to remember which numbers associated with the letters, and it's not always very intuitive because you get it wrong most of the time. There you go. Yeah, thanks. Awesome. Thanks. So you're dialing these like strange letter combinations that you might not know. And then it dials a number at the end, and maybe you get it right, maybe you get it wrong. So that's one of them, letter dial. And then this one is another error project I made called Camera Face, and I actually have a demo of it. So this is a camera that will only take bad photos. So it will only take pictures if you're not looking at the camera, or you put something in front of the camera, which we do a lot of, right? And so it uses artificial intelligence to discover if there's a face in front of the camera or not. If it doesn't see a face, it'll work. If it does see a face, forget it. And so that's one of the things. And also, I was looking at studies about this, and then back in 2020, there was a project, one poll in Western Digital, that said that 41% of people interviewed avoid deleting photos from the devices. And what about you guys? If you probably have a lot of photos on your device, you just don't delete, right? They just stay on there forever that you probably could delete. So let's see if this works. But I have a demo in Chrome there. So that's me. It's called Camera Face. So it sees my face, right? And I'm trying to hit snap, and it says can't capture, right? But now I put my hand over it like that. Snap. Go down to the photo gallery. There's the picture. So all bad pictures of my hand, basically. But I'll put this other one of this little thing I'm using here. See if that does it. Snap. That seemed to work. And then go down here, there. So it only works if you're treating it badly. All right. So keep moving on here. So more projects in this series look at kind of other interfaces that we could do to build it. So this is one of my favorites. It's called password. Basically, it's a password field that when you enter a password, it will automatically change your password back to the word password every time. So it will give you the worst possible password that you could ever choose. So there's me choosing a really complicated, weird password, and then I hit set my password, and it changes it back to password. So this also looks at the fact that 72% of people have passwords in their personal accounts. They store passwords in things that are not secure at all, and that's typically an error that's definitely replicable. Looking at sort of laziness in general. Also looking at errors that we do with mechanical things. So this is a printer project called Paper Jam. And this is a printer that will automatically cause a paper jam every 5 prints, no matter what you do. So it forces you to rethink of how you might actually print. It also looks at recycling levels in the country, which are not where they should be. There's enough paper discarded that you could build a 12-foot wall from Seattle to New York every year. That much paper is wasted. It was quite crazy. And then it highlights environmental impact of this office paper that's wasted. Here's a quick video that I made of this project. So paper is jammed in the printer. And it's not pretty when it jams, for sure. This is a laser printer, I think. But yeah. So that's an example of adding error to something that, typically we also always make errors with. Usually the paper isn't loaded correctly, or the printer is just so old that we never replaced it. Yeah, mention that. There's a lot of waste in general with paper, so we're trying to get to this paperless world that was promised to us years ago and never happened. We'll see if it does. Yeah. Oops. Okay, so then as I go forward, as I go backwards. So this one is another one in the Air project called No Signal. And it's a monitor that will change your source to no signal every time. Sorry, to no source. If you have probably plug things in, you're like, why am I getting no signal? So it's a software device on the actual monitor that stops signal from happening no matter what plug you change it to, and emphasizes this error that we have this non-standardized array of monitor and of TV software, firmware. All the firmware for your television and devices are always different. There's no standardization here, so that always confuses people. And so this is also usually an easy error to fix that most people can't figure out. So this is a quick video. So somebody trying to connect to it, but can't. Yeah. Good jewelry. No signal. We all know that's snow, which probably should be released. Kind of crazy. So looking also at abbreviation and discommunication, I call it. This is an autocorrect engine that I made called basically autocorrect. So this basically allows, it changes your text to Twitter type shorteners and word and lead type things. So if you write the word was, it changes it to was, or when AYFKMYTS, and basically all these kind of shorteners. This is in a general word processing application. It's trying to write like a paper in Word, for instance, or something. It'll change all of your text to shorten text. And so it's a hacked autocorrection engine that uses wrongly used abbreviations. People, yeah, it changes to people. And so whether we choose to or not, it changes them and modifies them and makes them kind of unreadable. That's called leet speak, I think, in the general term. But you guys have all used it probably when you're shortening things in Twitter messages or even text messages with your friends. And so imagine that integrated into everything you write down. A little bit different than ChatGPT. Yeah. And then another hardware project in this is a project I made called Crowded Strip. So it's a power strip that has too many plug holes, so you can't fit any plugs in to, because basically none of them line up correctly. So it makes a power strip basically unusable completely. This is a mouse that I made called Right Click that only clicks right, so you can never select anything. It only gives you menus. And then this is a power switch that will only turn things off. You can't turn anything on with it. The other kind of example of things that we do wrong with technology. More software is Demandware is a website that demands ransomware, and then when you pay it, it shows you that it is ransomware, so you have to keep paying it as a loop forever. Auto delete is software agent that runs on your word processing software and just starts deleting random things all the time as you're typing. so that you can't get them back. And then it disables the undo, so you can't undo anything. Also, spam mailer is an email client where like every time you write an email, it sends that to the person's spam folder every time, so they'll never get it because it just inserts like thousands of links that will never come through. And then finally, I wanted to show this. So this is a project that the last thing I'm showing is this project Wordplay, but then I'll show the demo at the end that you guys participate. So I have a project installed right now in New York City at the New York Hall of Science. It's called Wordplay. It's a physical, that date's wrong. It's going until March 15th now, but it's a physical version of the game Mad Libs. You guys played Mad Libs probably, right? As kids. So it uses, instead of words that you select from your head, it uses printed words on radio frequency ID cards, so small credit card size words. And there are 400 words, all split into 4 categories of nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. And basically people choose the word type and the system prompts them for words, and then it generates a story from those words. And in this case, because it's at the museum, the New York Hall of Science, I chose, the topic is famous quotes from scientists like Albert Einstein, Lise Meitner, Mae Jemison, the first African-American astronaut, a lot of kind of famous people in the scientific community, and also scientific facts, things like the solar system, the sun, and that gets remixed. So this is a video that I made. It's also too loud. Everything's loud. But this is a video that I made that I'm working on the next version of. But it's this platform that you put the words on, and the words show up on the screen. So all of them are printed on these cards. And those are just some examples of the cards. But it's kind of crazy. And you place it on the platform, and the platform changes to the color of the card. And those are, all the cards are in bins to separate them. And it's coded that way. Try turning it down. I don't think this is gonna work. Too loud, too loud. But it's up for a couple more weeks if you make it to New York between now and then. So then the words show up as like particle systems, and they float over to the side where they are, and then once they're done, it generates the story afterwards. It was a really fun project to work on. I worked on it with several different people helping with some of the code and some of the design for it, and the fabrication was done by the team at the museum. And then this is a story that it would make. So it's a quote from Marie Curie, but the words are all chosen by people in the museum. You know, it fills in the words dynamically. It's a pretty fun project to play with. And then everything gets published to the website in real time and to Twitter in real time. So on Twitter, there's actually a count of how many stories were made, and we're almost at 2,000 starting from December now. So that's the Twitter account, Wordplay Exhibit. And then it prints stories that you can take home with you, so in case you don't have access to a phone. So that's up for another couple of weeks at the museum, and hopefully I'll bring it somewhere else after the museum. Let's see. So just to kind of close up, and then we'll do the demo. So looking at critical network experience, this is sort of a guide I came up with. I thought this was funny. You can actually get a VR headset and do an internet cafe simulator now, which is kind of insane. But looking at subverting network ubiquities. So something that I do with my work is I try to deconstruct network interfaces to create new relationships. We have networks all around us, but how do we change our relationship to those networks, and how do we see them in different ways? And that's what the work does. When you take a context of a network, so this was like the example of the police stuff, when you redefine a context, it really changes our experience. When you modify what people see online, and you try to play with those images and play with the sounds and things like that, how does that affect our use of them? When you take a standard that everyone understands, in this case, my email list project, for instance, and you just change a rule, you know, that disrupts engagement and really makes people think differently about the platforms that they're using, because they have to like reimagine their use completely. Mistrust the cloud completely. No. Look at all the stuff you're losing to the cloud, your memory and other things, and try to like get that back, and like try to think about ways you could actually do that to get that back. And then finally, disconnect all the objects that are connected, because if you disrupt these interfaces, if you have an Alexa at home, chances are she's listening to everything you're saying, even though you're not saying Alexa, so you don't actually know what's happening there. Yeah, so thank you guys for listening. But I'll do a demo now too. You want to do questions at the end or now or? Yeah. You could do some quick questions and then we can do the demo if you have any questions. But yeah, and then I'm on Twitter at CoinOp29 and a lot more projects on my website, which is coinoperated.com. Oh yeah, right. While the questions are happening. Yeah, so for the project, you have to get out your phones. I'll go here, not this anymore. And you have to text a message to, or try to answer this question. My question to you is, what's the best thing about VTech, right? Basically text your answer to that number and it should be visualized on the screen. And this doesn't store numbers, so don't worry about that. It's just really for showing how groups can interact in public spaces without data being tied to them. And it should play a sound as soon as the first message comes in. Yeah, should be some sound. There you go. Oh, there's no sound. I guess the sound was wrong. Or maybe I'm muting. Oh, that's why I'm muting it. So if I go like this, let me unmute.
Do you want to leave it muted so we can?
Oh yeah, yeah. So we can do questions.
All right. Does anyone have a question that they'd like to ask? Here, mind if I give you this just so it can be?
And the cool thing about this is a live 3D environment, so you can like kind of move their messages around and stuff.
Why are you, as an artist and more so as someone who's involved in political activism, skeptical of the connectivity that the internet brings, especially when it can break down cultural barriers and, more importantly, organize protest and expose government misdoing?
Yeah, well, I'm not skeptical of that. I think that's great. I mean, I think, what we had with Arab Spring and, all these like protests, like that wouldn't have happened without the internet, so that's good. I just like kind of questioning the tools that we're using and seeing why they're not more socially infused, like why there's not more messages coming through on them. I think we could really change things if we just added that stuff and just change people's perspectives. Yeah. So I'm not against any of that stuff. I really like it, but yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
I think they're busy looking at their messages.
Yeah. Somebody broke the filter with poo. All right.
No.
All right.
Sorry.
All right. It's not perfect. It's not perfect. There is AI that does some of this, and it's not perfect AI. Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could talk about how you navigate working with labels for what you do. So I feel like I would think you're an artist, but
Yeah.
I could also see you calling yourself a designer or a technologist, or do you feel comfortable with certain labels, or like what's your relationship with those?
I think you can just say artist as like an overall label, because typically that covers, technologists. I mean, you could be a technology artist. You don't have to be, but I mean, I'm comfortable with that. I don't really like. I mean, I've been called different things like data artist, media artist, regular artist. So I'd say just regular artist is fine. Yeah, regular. Yeah, just like, because I do stuff with different mediums. Like I have physical things, I have digital things, non-physical things. I haven't done any VR things, but yeah, we can move these around a little bit. Once there's too many messages, though, it becomes kind of crazy. But
for the sake of time, we can probably have one more question. If anyone has one last question they'd like to ask.
Yeah. Any more questions? I want to get some video of that. That's cool.
Okay. Thank you, Jonah, so much for taking the time to come talk to us today.